Olym-Void did not collapse in explosions or catastrophic earthquakes. It unraveled in absolute silence, as the threads of magic grew thinner and thinner like the fading breath of an old person slipping into twilight. At the summit of the Origin Tower, where the sky was no longer blue but a pale ash-gray ribbon, the Sentinel stood. His cloak was heavy with the sigils of the structure, ancient bronze symbols, tasked with keeping the floating continents from falling into the void below. The Sentinel had no name, or rather, his personal name had been stripped away when he was forged from the world's core to become a living outpost. His duty was to observe, to witness the decay of reality, and ensure it did not unravel faster than permitted. The wind here was cold. Not the cold of winter, but the cold of an absence of life. Across the ceiling circle, the weaver was weaving. She was a woman with gaunt hands, yet cruelly precise. Her fingers moved through the air, drawing faint strands of luminous thread from the heart of the void to mend the tears in the sky. Each time a thread was pulled taut, her body trembled slightly. The weaver was not merely weaving magic. She was weaving with her own memories and essence. In Olym-Void, magic did not arise from nothing, it was extracted from the soul of the weaver. Today, a silver thread snapped. The sound was faint, like a harp string breaking in the middle of the night, but in the stillness of Olym-Void, it rang out like thunder. The Sentinel turned. His eyes meant to be cold as stone wavered when he saw the weaver collapse. The surrounding threads spiraled out of control, lashing through the air and tearing black fissures across the gray sky. "Don't stop," the Sentinel said, his voice rough like stone grinding against stone. "If you stop, the abyss will flood the east." The weaver lifted her head. Cold sweat streamed down her forehead, and her eyes, once a deep violet of fading stars, met his gaze. It was a look that should not exist between two beings such as them. It held no submission to destiny, only a profoundly human pain. "It's running out, Sentinel," she whispered. "I no longer have enough memories of spring to weave warmth for the south. I've forgotten the color of roses, and now the threads are only the color of ash." The Sentinel took a step toward her. By law, he was forbidden to leave his post. The space between them was an inviolable boundary, a gap designed to prevent emotional resonance. For emotion was the most dangerous impurity in a world on the brink of annihilation. Yet he took another step. "What do you still remember?" he asked, his voice lowered, almost a forbidden confession. The weaver gave a faint, withered smile. "I remember an afternoon in the valley below, before the mist swallowed everything. I remember seeing you standing on the cliff, and for the first time in my life, I wondered whether your cloak was warm enough to shelter someone, instead of only shielding the structure of this world." The Sentinel froze. A sharp pain ran along his spine, not physical pain, but the structure resisting, vibrating within his chest. Love, or anything resembling it, was a deviation. Like a grain of sand in a decaying clockwork, it could stop the mechanism, or shatter the last remaining gears. "We are not allowed to remember each other that way," the Sentinel said, though his hand had unconsciously loosened its grip on the guarding blade. "I know," the weaver replied, her hands resuming their motion, weaving a dull gray thread to seal the new tear. "But this world is dying, Sentinel. Why must we sacrifice everything to prolong an endless death rattle? To keep a heap of ruins alive for a few more silent centuries? Because it is our duty. If I endure, the world continues. And if you endure, I will disappear," the weaver cut in. "You are the frame, I am the thread. A frame has meaning only when something is stretched across it. When the thread is exhausted, you are nothing but a skeleton standing in the void." The Sentinel looked down at his hands calloused by centuries of wielding weapons, centuries of resisting the void. He had never been taught how to touch another being. He knew only how to prevent, how to protect, how to stand unmoving. But now, seeing the weaver frail amid threads draining her strength, he felt a strange urge, a rebellion sprouting from the ashes of duty. The sky suddenly darkened to a deep crimson, the sign of a void storm forming. Magic had lost its rhythm. The weaver's pulse was no longer synchronized with the breath of Olym-Void. Her distraction, her newly awakened feeling like a misplaced sprout, had opened a breach. "Focus," the Sentinel shouted, rushing toward her as a shard of reality fell from the tower's peak. He did not use his sword to deflect it. He used his own body. Crack! A fracture echoed from the Sentinel's shoulder armor. Blood spilled, but it was not red. It was a thick, metallic fluid, the blood of the structure. The weaver cried out softly, reaching for him as he collapsed beside her. For the first time in millennia, the Sentinel and the weaver touched. A violent current surged through them both. Olym-Void convulsed. The surrounding threads flared brilliantly, then withered at once. The sensation was both agonizing and deliriously sweet, the collision of opposites. The rigidity of stone and the softness of breath. In that moment, the Sentinel saw what the weaver had seen: dried oceans, cities reduced to memory, and the infinite loneliness of one who must weave a world from her own flesh. And the weaver saw what the Sentinel bore: the weight of continents, the exhaustion of a soul forbidden to rest, and a secret yearning to let go once and fall into the void. "You're hurt," the weaver whispered, her trembling hand touching the wound on his shoulder. "It's nothing," the Sentinel replied, yet he did not rise. He allowed himself to remain there, in the arms of the one he was meant to stand miles apart from. "The fracture has begun, Weaver. Not in the sky but here." He placed a hand over his chest, where a stone heart beat for the first time to a rhythm not dictated by the laws of Olym-Void. In the distance, the horizon lost another fragment. A floating island disintegrated into fine dust, falling into the abyss without a sound. The world was dying faster now, accelerated by their closeness. Each second they remained together demanded a price from reality. Their love was not a miracle of salvation. It was a magnificent poison, hastening the collapse of the world they were sworn to protect. "If we continue like this," the Sentinel said, staring into the void, "Olym-Void will not survive until the next season." The weaver rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the cold seep from the bronze armor. "Then let it fade while we still remember each other's names. I would rather weave a burial shroud for this world from threads of love than continue patching the corpse of a soulless existence." The Sentinel did not answer. He knew she was right and impossibly wrong. The existence of millions of beings, even if only faint remnants of souls, rested on his shoulders. But when he looked into the weaver's violet eyes, he saw another world, a world with only the two of them, without structure or threads, only the quiet peace of the void. The void storm subsided for now, but the sky bore a permanent scar, a murky gray stain that could never be healed. The Sentinel rose slowly, heavily, and extended a hand to help the weaver stand. They returned to their posts, separated once more by a fateful distance. Yet an invisible bond had formed. It was not magic, it was something more primal, more terrifying. They had committed the first mistake. Below the tower, the death knells of Olym-Void began to toll, slow, steady. Magic had chosen its own death, for it could no longer bear the weight of a heart that knew how to love. The wound on the Sentinel's shoulder would not close. It wasn't like the wounds of creatures made of flesh and bone. It didn't redden or swell. Instead, it was a deep black fissure, in a pale silver light like diluted mercury. Each drop of this blood that fell onto the stone floor of the Origin Tower produced a faint hissing sound, not from heat, but because it was eroding the very space it touched. Around the Sentinel, the air began to twist. The stone pillars, once perfectly vertical, now tilted at an irrational angle, as if reality itself were trying to recoil from his presence. The Sentinel clenched the hilt of his sword, his knuckles turning white. He felt the tremor of the structure. Deep beneath the soil of Olym-Void, invisible gears were groaning. He had allowed another entity to touch him, a forbidden resonance. Now, his body was no longer a pure outpost. It had become a fault point. "Don't look at me like that," the Sentinel said, without turning around. Behind him, the Weaver still sat there. Her hands, once the most exquisite instruments of creation, were now wrapped in deep crimson threads. Not the red of blood, but the red of rage. The magical threads she wove to mend the sky had grown sharp as filament blades. Each time, she tried to pull them together to reconnect the fractured clouds. They sliced into her flesh, leaving cuts as fine as hair yet burning all the way to the core. "They're resisting me," the Weaver whispered, her voice trembling with exhaustion. "The magic. It no longer wants to be woven. It wants to sever everything." She looked down at her hands. Every time the image of the Sentinel shielding her surfaced in her mind, every time the warmth of his bronze armor echoed in her memory, the threads tightened around her fingers. Love, or this strange seed now taking root, was turning weaving magic into a form of self-destructive weaponry. "Every time I think of you," she realized bitterly, "this world tears a little more." The Sentinel finally turned around. He saw the cuts on her hands, saw the devastation his presence was inflicting upon her. According to Sentinel protocol, he should have drawn his sword and re-established order. He should have forced her to continue weaving, or isolated himself within the core of the structure to extinguish this resonance. But he could not. His feet moved toward her of their own accord, despite the space around him warping and screaming. Every step was a betrayal of duty. "If I keep more distance from you," he asked, "will the pain lessen?" The Weaver looked up at him, her violet eyes now clouded with black void lightning. "Distance no longer matters, Sentinel. We touched each other. That collision has been etched into the core of Olym-Void. Even if you stand at the far end of the world, I will still feel your misaligned pulse in every thread I touch." She raised a handful of cuts into the air. A jet-black thread materialized, trembling, razor-sharp. "Do you hear it?" she asked. The Sentinel listened in silence, not with his ears, but through the vibration of the bronze sigils on his cloak. A whisper rose from the void, a voiceless, cold, ancient sound. It was the echo of Olym-Void, the last will of a dying world. One must wither so the other may blaze. One must become void so the other may remain reality. The prophecy was not new, but for the first time, manifested clearly, like a death sentence. The Sentinel froze. He saw the truth exposed in the silver leaking wound on his shoulder. His existence was consuming the energy the Weaver needed to weave. In return, the Weaver's efforts to preserve meaning in the world were destabilizing the physical structure he defended. They were like two figures standing on a seesaw suspended over an abyss. Whoever reached out to grasp the other would unbalance it, sending both to their deaths, or more cruelly, one would have to jump so the other might remain above. "If the Sentinel lives, the Weaver will be destroyed," he repeated the law in a hollow voice. "If the Weaver lives, the structure will collapse. But what if we both die?" The Weaver asked a question openly defiant of fate. "Then nothing remains. Not even a fragment of the memory of the rose-esque color you cherish would survive into the void." They stared at each other across a space that was cracking apart. Their love was not a sanctuary, but a battlefield where every glance was a wound. A violent tremor shook the top of the tower, stronger than any before. This time, it came not from the sky, but from deep beneath the tower's foundations. One of Olym-Void's 4 primary pillars had just been corroded by the silver fluid from the Sentinel's shoulder. "You have to go," the Weaver said suddenly, her voice sharpening. "You must go down there and use your sword to pin the basement structure back into place. If you don't, the origin tower will collapse in less than an hour." The Sentinel looked at her, hesitating. "And you?" "I will weave a protective mesh around the tower's summit. Even if it costs me this entire hand, I will not let this crack widen any further. The Sentinel knew it was the only solution, but he also knew that leaving now would mark the beginning of a more agonizing polarization. The harder they tried to save the world separately, the more they forced each other toward opposite ends of existence. He said no farewell. In the Sentinel's world, there were no words for parting because they had never truly been allowed to belong to each other in the first place. He simply turned away, the heavy sword in his hand emitting the dark light of coercion. As his figure disappeared down the spiral stone staircase, the weaver collapsed. She no longer tried to weave the sky. She began to weave something else. She pulled a thread from deep within her chest, a pale golden thread, shimmering and fragile. It was her most beautiful memory, the memory of a time when she was not a weaver, but merely a girl waiting for someone beneath an ancient tree. She wrapped that thread around her bleeding finger. "If I cannot save you," she whispered into the void, "then I will turn this love into a curse that this world will never be able to unravel." In the dark basement of the Origin Tower, the Sentinel drove his sword deep into the core of the world. A scream rose from the depths. The structure was re-anchored through the power of sacrifice, but the wound on his shoulder flared violently, rendering his entire left arm translucent as it began to dissolve into warp space. The fracture had been temporarily halted, but the price had begun to be collected. They were still alive, but their souls had already started tearing apart in opposite directions, one becoming cold stone to hold the world steady, the other becoming bleeding threads to weave illusion. And between them, love remained like a nameless ghost, silently watching the collapse of a paradise it had never been permitted to enter. In the basement of the Origin Tower, darkness was not the absence of light, but a dense entity that devoured all sound. The Sentinel knelt there, his right hand gripping the hilt of the sword driven deep into the core of the structure. His left arm had now become completely translucent, nothing more than a faint outline of light shaped like an arm, devoid of sensation, devoid of weight. Each time the ground trembled, signaling that a distant continent was beginning to drift apart, the Sentinel had to force more strength into the sword, and every time he did, a low, mournful groan echoed from the bronze blade. The sword had been contaminated by his emotions, the misaligned affection he harbored for the weaver. It was no longer a pure instrument of order. It had become a conduit for pain. At the other end of the connection, atop the tower, the weaver suddenly doubled over. A searing agony tore through her core, as if an invisible blade were thrust straight through her spine. She knew it was the Sentinel. She knew that every time he tried to save the world, he was unknowingly crushing her. "Stop, Sentinel," she whispered, but her voice was swallowed by the wind screaming through the fractures in reality. To withstand the pain, the weaver's instincts began seeking solace. The protective net she had woven around the summit of the tower, rather than repelling the void, now started attracting parasitic memories. These were fragments of lost worlds, illusions of an era when Olym-Void still shimmered with color. They seeped into her mind, weaving a magnificent, warm substitute reality. In the weaver's eyes, the ashen sky of Olym-Void suddenly transformed into a brilliant blue. The black cracks turned into soft white clouds, and most importantly, the Sentinel no longer stood in the dark basement. He stood before her, clad in flowing white silk, no bronze armor, no sword, and his eyes looked at her with a love unbound by prohibition. "Come here, Weaver," the illusion of the Sentinel smiled, extending a warm hand toward her. The Weaver smiled back, a blissful, innocent smile. Her bleeding hands began weaving golden threads that wrapped tenderly around the illusion. She did not know that each thread woven in this delirium was draining the tower's last protective layer. She was creating a private paradise by dismantling the final bricks of the real world. In the basement below, the Sentinel felt the change. The weight of the world on his sword suddenly became unbearably heavy. He heard the Weaver's laughter echoing from the tower's core, a laugh pure in tone, yet saturated with destruction. "She's fading," the Sentinel murmured. He wrenched the sword from the core. The tremors intensified instantly. The origin tower tilted at a 10-degree angle. He could not allow her to drown in that illusion, even if it meant dragging her back into a reality filled with suffering. The Sentinel stormed up the stone steps at a frantic pace, though his translucent left arm disintegrated into motes of light each time it collided with warp space. When he emerged onto the summit, the sight before him tightened his stone heart. The Weaver was dancing amid a forest of radiant golden threads. She did not see him. She gazed into the void, smiling at a phantom. The parasitic memories coiled tightly around her neck, draining her vitality to sustain the illusion of a false spring. "Weaver, wake up!" the Sentinel shouted. She turned toward him, but her gaze passed straight through. "What are you saying, Sentinel? Look, the roses I told you about. They're blooming. We don't need to sacrifice anything anymore. The world has been saved." She reached out to touch a flower, what was truly a rupture in reality, leaking destructive energy. If her hand made contact, her soul would be swallowed by the void instantly. The Sentinel knew words would not suffice. He had to resort to the cruelest method to shatter the structure of the illusion. He raised the bronze sword. It trembled, sensing the Weaver's presence. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Instead of striking the Weaver, he plunged the sword into his own shadow at his feet. Because they were resonant, his physical pain would be transmitted directly and amplified within her mind, powerful enough to tear the illusion apart. Thud. The Sentinel clenched his teeth to suppress a scream. Silver blood seeped from the wound. On the summit, the Weaver froze. The smile vanished from her lips, replaced by a piercing scream. The blue sky collapsed like shattered glass. White clouds turned to ash. The warmth of the illusionary hand became the biting cold of the void. She collapsed onto the frigid stone floor, watching the ashen, brutal reality reassert itself. She saw the Sentinel standing there, the sword embedded in his own shadow, his face pale with agony. "What have you done?" she sobbed, as the golden threads in her hands transformed into blackened chains. "I brought you home," the Sentinel said, his voice thin as paper. "Even if this home is nothing more than ruins." The Weaver looked down at her hands. The old cuts had deepened, and the bitter truth struck her fully. Their love did not only wound the world, it was also the most effective weapon for hurting each other. To save her life, he had to torment her. To protect him, she had to weave a world in which he could not exist. Olym-Void, after the convulsion, fell into a terrifying silence. The death tolls had ceased, replaced by a deep, continuous groan stretching across the horizon. The Sentinel withdrew his sword and stepped closer without touching her. He stood at the boundary of safety, watching the woman he loved tremble in the aftermath of a paradise ripped away. "Do not weave those memories again," he warned. "They will consume you until nothing remains but an empty shell." The Weaver looked up at him. Her violet eyes now held a flicker of hatred, not toward him, but toward the fate that forced them to remain lucid amid this collapse. "I would rather be a happy empty shell," she whispered, "than a conscious being forced to feel every strike of your sword within my soul." The bond between them had grown stronger, but it was the strength of a rope tightening its knot around both their necks. Love had officially become a moral burden. Every time they cared for each other, the price was physical and psychological torture. At the place where the Sentinel had driven his sword into his own shadow, a dead point had formed. It was not a pit, nor a crack. It was a region of absolute void, a pitch-black circle on the stone floor that reflected no light whatsoever. Neither the silver glow leaking from his wound, nor the spectral threads of the Weaver. The dead point resembled an eye that never blinked, staring unflinchingly at the betrayal of its guardians. The sentinel stood several steps away from the black circle. His left arm was now nothing more than a faint haze, shimmering with weak particles of light, yet physical pain was insignificant compared to the chaos raging within his mind. Traitor, sinner of the structure, the voices began to rise. They did not come from outside, but surged from deep within the core of the bronze sword, traveling up his right arm and stabbing straight into his brain. They were the voices of previous Sentinels entities that had dissolved into the structure to keep Olym-Void alive through countless eras. You allowed the warmth of a weaver to melt your stone will, one voice rasped, grinding like crushing rock. You used pain to awaken her, but that very act has nailed her fate into darkness. Do you know what you have just done? The sentinel closed his eyes, cold sweat streaming down his stern face. I saved her. You postponed her end by turning her into an abomination. The voice sneered. Look, Sentinel, look at the hands of the one you love. The sentinel opened his eyes. On the opposite side of the dead point, the weaver was trying to weave, but the sight before him filled him with the cold he had never known. The weaver could no longer draw forth threads of light. Each time she reached into the void, what emerged from her fingertips were thick, tar-like black strands that reeked of decay. Wherever she wove, space was not mended, but smothered beneath the dark, oppressive membrane. These threads did not connect reality. They isolated it. The weaver's fingertips had turned ashen black. She wove in silence, her face hollow, her violet eyes now nothing more than two bottomless pits. Weaver, stop, the sentinel called softly. The weaver lifted her head. A single black tear slid down her cheek. I can't stop. If I do, feel your sword carving my chest open. This darkness, it's the only thing that numbs me against the pain you cause. Each time the weaver wove a dark thread, the structure beneath the sentinel groaned. Her darkness was adding weight to reality. Olym-Void, already crumbling, now had to bear the threads of despair. Do you see now? The voices in the sentinel's head screamed. Her existence has become a physical burden on the world. The longer she lives, the faster Olym-Void will collapse into the dead point you created. You must decide, Sentinel. Do not wait until the 30 cycles end. Kill the weaver or watch this world become an eternal black tomb. The sentinel tightened his grip on the sword. There is still time. Time is a luxury for those with a future. You and she have only disintegration. The sentinel's steps were heavy as he moved toward the weaver. The dead point between them seemed to expand, drawing in small fragments of stone. He stopped at the very edge of the black circle. Weaver, look at me, he commanded, his voice hiding a desperate plea. The weaver halted. The black threads sagged around her like venomous serpents. I am looking at you, Sentinel. I see a man who is fading away. I see a hero becoming a murderer. And I see myself becoming the death this world has been longing for. We can find another way, he said, though he knew it was a clumsy lie. If I can redirect the corrosion from my shoulder into the dead point, perhaps the pressure on you will lessen. The weaver laughed, a sound as cold as wind shrieking through a bone door. You want to use the void to heal the void? Sentinel, you are the guardian of structure. You should understand better than anyone. Olym-Void does not accept repair. It only accepts replacement. One life for one life. One soul for one reality. She extended her blackened hand, hovering it over the dead point. Do you know what it feels like to weave with darkness? It's like stitching memories of pain back together. I no longer remember the color of roses. I remember only the feeling of their petals withering. I no longer remember your laughter and the illusion. I remember only the sword you drove into your shadow. Her pain crossed the resonant bond and struck him sharp, bitter. The sentinel fell to one knee, bracing himself with the sword against the stone floor. The voices of the previous sentinels fell abruptly silent, replaced by a terrifying stillness. It was the sign of an approaching event. From Olym-Void's horizon, an aberrant violet light flared and died. Another continent had vanished. This time, it did not crumble. It was swallowed by a sudden structural displacement. "It's coming closer," the Sentinel whispered. "The decision. It's no longer waiting for us." He looked at the Weaver, standing amid black threads and encroaching shadows. She resembled a goddess of collapse. He realized that his protection was the greatest cruelty. Every second he kept her in this world, he forced her to weave her own pain, to sustain a soulless corpse called reality. Their love had reached a new distortion. To love meant letting the other die. To protect meant making the other suffer. "Weaver," the Sentinel said, straightening despite his left arm fading almost completely. "If one day can no longer hear your voice, know that it is because I chose the cruelest way to love you." The Weaver did not answer. She began weaving again. Black threads coiled around her neck and fragile shoulders, tugging her toward the dead point below. At the summit of the Origin Tower, the two entities stood there, separated by a black hole of their own making. The world around them melted in silence, while the echoes of the previous Sentinels resumed their murmur, counting down the final breaths of a misaligned reality. Olym-Void finally stripped its guardians of their last remaining comfort: sound. The silent zone did not arrive like a storm. It spread like an oil slick, swallowing the shriek of wind through stone crevices, the groaning of the structure, even the heavy breathing of the Sentinel. Everything fell into a terrifying stillness, an oppressive silence so dense it felt as though one's eardrums might burst from the pressure of the void itself. The Sentinel stood there on the highest level of the Origin Tower, yet he could no longer hear his own footsteps. When he collided with the fragment of the stone railing, no sound of collapse followed. The world now resembled an old film with its audio track destroyed, only hollow movements remained. And within that absolute silence, his vision began to betray him. In every dark corner of the tower, behind fallen pillars, even within his own shadow, the Sentinel saw the Weaver, not the flesh and blood Weaver weaving darkness on the far side of the dead point, but dozens of her illusions. They stood there with tear-soaked violet eyes dripping black, lips shaping a single message he no longer needed to hear to understand. "Kill me, Sentinel. Please kill me. End it before this darkness devours even the memory of you." Each colorless, voiceless plea pierced the Sentinel's mind like icy needles. He swung the bronze sword, slashing at the illusions, but the blade passed straight through gray smoke. They were not monsters. They were fragments of resonance twisted by the silent zone. Now, the only way to communicate was through pain. The Sentinel closed his eyes, focusing on the bond vibrating violently within his chest. He sent out a thought, a brutal, sharpened surge of energy. "Weaver, what are you doing? Stop these illusions." On the other side of the dead point, the Weaver raised her head. In the silent zone, she looked like a dissolving specter. Her hands were no longer weaving, but black threads from her fingers had pierced deep into the stone floor, stretching outward like poisonous roots, creeping toward the Sentinel. Through the bond, a violent pain surged back into him. This was not the pain of a wound, but the pain of mental invasion. The Sentinel felt the Weaver's black threads infiltrating his mind, touching the dark region where the ghosts of the previous Sentinels resided. "I didn't create them, Sentinel." The Weaver's voice echoed directly inside his thoughts, distorted and laced with mad laughter. "I'm just talking to your old friends." The Sentinel shuddered. He felt the Weaver's black threads coil around the souls of the fallen guardians. The voices that had once screamed for his punishment suddenly fell silent. Weaver was using her darkness to dominate them, to suffocate the judgments of the structure. But the price was her sanity. "You'll go insane." The Sentinel sent a warning laced with agony, causing the cuts on the Weaver's hands to split wider. "Release them. You're destroying the essence of a Weaver." "The Weaver died the moment you stabbed your own shadow," the Weaver replied. Her illusion appeared right beside his ear. even though her real body still stood 10 paces away. "Now, I am the silence of this world. I can hear every thought you have, Sentinel. I see your fear. You ray afraid to kill me, but you ray even more afraid to watch me become this." The Sentinel's left arm, now completely translucent, suddenly convulsed. A black thread from the weaver wrapped around it, and for the first time, he felt a strange power flow into his body, the power of disintegration, of void. The weaver's illusions around him all stepped forward at once. They knelt at his feet, offering pale throats in a merciless invitation. "Do it." Weaver transmitted the command through the darkness. "If you use the sword tainted by your love to end me in this silent zone, you'll free us both. Olym-Void will gain a few more silent centuries, and you'll never again have to hear me scream in pain." The Sentinel raised his sword. Its weight was no longer just bronze, it was the weight of thousands of years of duty, and a love so warped it was no longer recognizable. The silent zone suddenly trembled. A massive rupture tore across the tower's summit, cutting straight through the dead point. Olym-Void was losing patience. Their hesitation was making the collapse uglier. The world had begun to consume itself. The Sentinel looked at the weaver, the only woman he had ever loved, and the only one he must destroy to protect a heap of ashes. He did not lower the sword, but he did not swing it toward her either. He drove the sword into the translucent palm of his own hand. The pain exploded like a nuclear detonation in both their minds. The silent zone was ripped open by a soul scream that no ear could hear, yet every cell could feel. The weaver's black threads were blasted out of the Sentinel's mind. The ghosts of the previous Sentinels were hurled back into the deepest darkness. The illusions of the weaver vanished. Only the real weaver remained, collapsing toward the dead point, black blood spilling from her mouth. "No." The Sentinel sent one final message before he too collapsed from exhaustion. "I will not kill you the way this world demands. If you must die, I will weave a death that even Olym-Void cannot interfere with." Silence returned, but this time, it was no longer oppressive. It carried the chill of a decision taking shape. The Sentinel knew he had just done something irreversible. He had shared his own disintegration with the weaver, and taken part of her darkness into his own structure. They were no longer two opposing poles. They were dissolving into one another, becoming a single collapse.